Man, so I've got like a serious question.
Mhm.
I mean, like I have a frog named Craig,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering, how do you name a bank Grasshopper?
Okay, so I'm actually thinking of all the Karate Kid jokes.
Snatch the phone from my head.
Grasshopper. I
Oh my
love
God.
it.
Yeah. I wonder if there was a little kung fu in there.
I don't know. I mean, it's digital kung fu, right?
Hey, I'm Chris Tremont, Chief Digital Officer of Grasshopper Bank. In my role as sort of a dual capacity of a revenue generating, so generating deposits mainly, and maybe some lending in the small business and banking as a service space, and then on the infrastructure side, get my hands in product and marketing and client services that support the whole bank.
Sounds like me.
We got like a million questions for you, man. I'll tell you what, we're really excited to have you on. I appreciate you taking the time too.
First backstory. So Chris and us, maybe we've known each other for, I don't know, probably close to 10 years, something like that, 8 years. And Chris goes back, if everybody remembers, like Radius Bank. And you guys got bought by Lending Club, right?
Correct.
So those cool stories that we talk about a lot, right? Of a bank that goes super digital, super fintech, and then all the fintech kids are like, these guys are cool and they want to pick up the charter, right? So I think that was not only everything you guys did was successful, but I think almost as an analogy for a community bank, like to look at as a path, you guys were kind of the groundbreaker of a different path.
So let me tell you this great story. So we're trying to track all this information and track everything here. And so you've got, I think at the time, Lending Club was under Cross River Bank. And so they're a fintech under a sponsor bank. And then they end up buying another bank and becoming basically the bank, making the bank a direct bank.
And the sponsor?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So trying to keep track of all this stuff, kind of nuts there, man. Yeah. But that's a crazy story. Let me ask the big question. Did you guys get a bigger premium because you were already a sponsor bank?
We'd like to think that we did. I mean, in general, around the strategy and being, at the end of the day, it was talk is cheap, right? Like being able to execute. So we like to think that being sort of forward thinking, I joined the bank back at the end of 2008, probably about 6 or 9 months after our president and CEO, Mike Butler, took over. And he and I sort of had a shared vision for where things were going to go. And certainly, that was 14 years ago. But still, digital banking, it wasn't a thing. Like we didn't invent, but being in a boardroom for a $300 million community bank in 2009, saying we're not going to build any more branches and we're going to go digital was quite a thing, right? Like we were sticking our necks out a little bit, and it took some time. But building that strategy to be able to direct to consumer, but also indirectly through the bank as a service platform took some time. And ultimately, we think it helped, add value for our client base and our shareholders too.
Yeah, that's great. We try to talk to people a lot about, the difference of just, going out and selling your bank to another bank. We lose a charter that way. Typically, you're going to get bottom of the barrel unless you've got something really sexy going on. And when you start talking about being a sponsor bank or, call it FinTech ready, man, that's a big plus.
Yeah.
So, hey, man, I've got so many. I'm going to try to run through these as fast as I can. So how did we come up with the name Grasshopper?
I told him it's Karate Kid, man. Wax on, wax off.
That would be a cool one. So I joined the bank in September of 2021. So it hasn't even been a year. The bank itself began operations in May of 2017. So predates me joining. And so the name and branding was already set. But it's kind of a cool story with how they came up with it. It's twofold. So Grasshopper Bank, one, it was women founded, and so pays homage to Grace Hopper, who was a U.S. Rear Admiral and actually helped design COBOL and some of the first banking systems. And so pays homage to Grace Hopper in the name. And then our tagline is only forward, which is interesting. Did you know that grasshopper, the insect, only moves forward? Like it doesn't jump backwards. So that's the tie-in to the insect piece of it as well.
Awesome. Okay, so for everybody out there that doesn't know what in the hell we're talking about here, Radius Bank was bought by a fintech called Lending Club, and it was a really cool arrangement where, you know, basically getting deposits, and then these guys are making the loans, and the partnership became so intrinsic with each other that it made more sense for them to buy. So the same guys that ran that bank have started basically this other bank, Grasshopper, and going about this in a really high tech way. So, you know, there's like 5 different things to cover, whether it's, you know, VCs or whether it's, you know, what type of fintechs you're looking for. How do you guys go about this? We also wanted to talk to you about the Bass Association, if you guys have heard of any of that.
Well, and you've got, look, I think Grasshopper is cool because you've got sort of a traditional digital, what we would call a direct bank feel, right? Similar to a Radius. And then you've also got a Bass side, right? So kind of dual focus. And from a fresh start perspective, I like it, right?
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And maybe I could talk a little bit about what's transpired over the last 12 months or so at Grasshopper. So the bank, its mission is to serve the business and innovation economy. So kind of broad statement, but it is a commercial digital bank headquartered in New York. So nice to have some roots in the city there, but kind of a remote first company. So about a head count of maybe around 100 or so, and we're scattered across the US. But the company's initial founding, as Dave said, was like to serve, call it the venture community. So venture capital and private equity firms, and then the founders in the portfolio companies that they invest in, and try to help them out from a banking perspective. Great business to be in. But for the first 2 years of the bank's existence, that was the primary or only business line. Opportunity came up as Radius Bank was acquired by Lending Club in early 2021. Some shared investors on the private equity side tapped Mike Butler, and then a few of us eventually joined the company to come in and sort of help expand, keep the mission the same, but expand on the vision. And so over the last 12 months, we've said we're going to keep our roots firmly planted in the venture side, but layer in a couple of other deposit gathering and lending activities. And so what we've done on the lending side is brought in some specialists in the world of SBA lending, commercial real estate, and then yacht financing, which was, people always love that one, but that's a holdover from the Radius time, and really a nice balance sheet management tool that we're all familiar with. And then on the deposit side, bringing in true, call it digital small business or SMB banking, like a really slick digital operating account and experience for small businesses, whether they're venture backed or not, and banking as a service. So the fintech play using APIs either for their own corporate use, or more probably practically speaking, you know, if they want to offer payments or bank accounts, these fintechs or non-banks, to their end client.
Yep.
And so to do that, we had to bring in, sort of like rebuilt the management team, have layered in, I don't know, headcounts probably up 20% this year. So brought in a lot of great talent from around the banking industry, as well as some people that have been at Grasshopper for a while. It's just been a real nice combination of teams. And we stood these business lines up probably starting in the fourth quarter of last year. So started executing this year. In addition to that, rebuilt the tech stack. So you guys will appreciate this. We changed out our core in about 2 months. We built an API middleware with our friends at Treasury Prime and FIS, and then we launched new front-end banking systems with FIS, NARMI, and Treasury Prime for different client bases. And we did all that in about 6 months. So I like to say some past experience doing this at Radius, this was probably like a 4-year roadmap. We did it in under months. And in the second quarter of this year, we kind of unveiled what we call Grasshopper 2.0, which is this expanded use cases and markets that we're serving. And back to your original question, it is serving. We always feel like if you can do this directly, under your own brand, that makes you that much more experienced and valuable working indirectly, say with fintech clients, to help them. When you've been through it, you've been in the trenches, I think they respect that more, and you're able to provide some insight and guidance that if you were only a sponsor bank, for example, you might not get it, right? And so that's what we found is some of the secret sauce, and have been excited to get to market here in the last 3 or 4 months.
That was that twofer I was talking about that I think is
Right.
really interesting in it. I wouldn't say the best sponsor BaaS banks have a really dual focus, but they've got some level of presence on the traditional side where they put a lot of their focus, right? It's sort of the learning exercise. That's just a common theme I see with everybody of going out there and seeing what's going on. I'll give you guys a cool stat. You want a fun number? So Bobby in his FinTech update this morning had said, I think he's talking about charter types of sponsor banks, of BaaS banks. I think it was 80% were commercially focused, which makes tons of sense, right?
Huh.
But one of those stats that, hey, there it is. Cool.
Right.
And I mean, if you think about it,
You kind of got to be a business-minded person to be able to get the whole idea.
well,
Yeah.
to Chris's point, if
Interesting.
you wanted to say it super simply, you think about what we'd all do on the retail consumer side as a bank. The same thing on the commercial side, except that there's a commercial customer in between the end user, right? And they just want to extend those features downstream. It's just one more click in the hierarchy. If you think of it that way, it's pretty darn simple, right?
Yeah.
So
If we think about it, bank's going to have its strategy, right? And so everybody's going to go about things a little bit differently. We've always been fans of, whether it was at Radius and now here at Grasshopper, of having options and levers to pull, right? Like different channels that you can be in, and having one foot in the direct business, which, to Dave's earlier point around where you drive premium and value, long term, owning, being a direct bank and truly owning the customer, there's a lot of value in that. But then there's also a lot of value in being able to scale and understanding this indirect fintech business and being a part of it, right? So just like having the ability to participate in both sides, I think has helped us along the way. And as you mentioned, other banks that like have a foot in both.
Right. Like balancing the balance sheet, right? Similar concept. I love it.
Right.
when you guys go about trying to pick fintechs that you'd like to, to associate with and work together with, I talked to so many different BaaS banks, and everybody's focus is just a little bit different, but everybody wants the hot potato, right? The guy with the cool trajectory and all that. But there's a lot of times a lot of minimums here where we're going to see a minimum level of this or a minimum level of that. And then others are, we want to catch them young. We want to make sure that the money flow is correct and everything's cool there. And other than that, we're ready to take these guys on and help them grow. What's your perspective?
Yeah, great question. We get asked that a lot. It's certainly evolved over time, Dave. I think the first probably fintech or BaaS deal we did was, it's hard to believe, it was like 10 years ago in 2012. And the amount of due diligence or the thought that went into it then versus now here in 2022 is crazy how different it is. And it's been fun. Also, fintech grow up and these companies become a lot more mature as well, right? When early on this focus of compliance, maybe it wasn't there, or the appreciation of the regulatory environment that we live in. And it's a different story. So today, the team Grasshopper, kind of the way that we think about it is, you kind of have your mental checklist or whatever that you're running through, but it's got to start with a cultural connection inside the company, like between the two companies. Are you culturally aligned? That funnels quickly into the strategic side of it, and what's the company trying to do, and does it align with the bank's plan and where we're trying to grow? I mentioned the compliance, but the respect for the regulatory environment and having a compliance program in place is super important for us as the bank thinking about sponsoring a financial technology company. And then probably finally the sort of the financial or the economic aspect of it, like, both sides are for-profit companies, so you're trying to structure a deal that's a win-win for both, right? So that's kind of how we approach it. There are some guardrails that we put in place. We get asked a lot around like segments and markets that we go after. And I like to say we're focused, but we're going to be opportunistic. Like I'm going to take pretty much any phone call that you guys send me, or, that we get referrals quite a bit, because you never know where the opportunity might be, right? So you got to take a lot of calls and whittle it down. But we've been fairly focused out of the gate here in the first 3 months of having banking as a service live, mostly focused on B2B companies, which are strongly in like our wheelhouse, or where we feel like we have a competitive advantage being a business bank. I've shied away a little bit to your question around like the pre-revenue neobanks probably are ones, where you're solely reliant on interchange or deposit interest as like your main way to grow. It's fine if it's a channel or an option, but like if that's it, a little different today than it was 5 years ago doing those deals. But we found some interesting opportunities within the special purpose vehicles, so the SPV space, which aligns nicely to our venture business. A lot in the world of prop tech and real estate. I don't know if you guys follow this, but like sort of the digitization of that area is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So many unique little niches that we've been trying to seek out. But last thing I'll say, at the end of the day, our approach has always been quality over quantity.
Right.
So our goal is not to do 100 deals in a year, it's to do 5 or 10, but to make sure we do our due diligence and we pick 10 really good ones, and we can give them all our energy and focus.
Yeah, I was talking, we were having a really cool conversation yesterday with somebody I think is just a great Bass bank. They do a really good job, but they were, talking about where they were at. And I think we all get too close to our own shop and what we're doing, right? And so like this problem or that, or here's our strategy and what we're working on and trying to improve here. And I'm like, look, my first statement is you're one of the best, right? You're in a great shape. You got a good vision. You're kicking ass, But one of the things that they talked about was that concept of how many new Bass opportunities can I bring on? And it was that same number, half a dozen a year is about what you can do. But if you look at sort of the newer, some of the connectors and things that have arose, theoretically you could bring on tons and tons, although the margins aren't there. The regulatory is probably a little question. Yeah, reconciliation gets nasty, right? But it's an opportunity to participate in a greater number, but you don't have that relationship, margins and everything else aren't there. And so I thought it was interesting that their approach was to try and do as much on their own technology and automate as much as they could to try and up that number. I think a little bit more like you do, right? I want a handful that are really quality. It's just not
just 5 unicorns a year and we got it made.
There you go, man. Yeah.
It all foots back to what your strategy is. I mean, neither is right or wrong. I think it's an enterprise sale at the end of the day. We were talking about a little bit earlier. This is a B2B sale where I'm selling you guys as a corporation, whether you want to open up, you want to be a bank on top of us and open consumer banking accounts. Our relationship is with you and with the end client. And so you got to think through the cycle like you would any other type of enterprise sale. And you have to be able to build a team that gets it and can think through the life cycle from initial conversation to ongoing customer success, not implementation and success management and compliance. And so it's repeatable. And some of these deals, some look similar over time, but each one of them takes a lot of care and feeding, right? And so trying to stack up hundreds of them on top of each other can be challenging, which is why we've chosen to try to pick some really quality companies to work with. But it also depends on, like you mentioned, what you're trying to do, right? Like, is the goal to grow the deposit book? Is it lending? Is it more payments or interchange focused? So some, depending on how the APIs are being used, some of them don't need as much as that care and feeding, right? So it really just foots back to what you're trying to do and then how you want to scale it and staff for it.
Well, it's something that we've really, really watched in the data, right? Is that a lot of Bass banks are getting super focused, right? Yeah. I mean, think about somebody like a Meta, for example, like probably the king of prepaid. I don't even know there's a close second, And I mean, even if it's something like that, that's fairly niche, you think about Lincoln on savings or other, parts and pieces. Cross River for a long time on the, what? Show fun at me.
Lincoln on savings is Lincoln savings on accounts. Yeah.
You know what I meant, man. Come
I
on.
followed you.
Yeah. See, you
Shortcuts,
got it.
man, little shortcuts.
Yeah.
I
I
followed.
mean, people are getting really differentiated. And so we're seeing, especially at the larger fintechs, 3, 4, 5 sponsor relationships.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Right? Because I struggle here thinking about that. To me, it's to your point of enterprise sale. And I want to really have, a lot of good relationships with that. I look at it as a customer, right? I mean, you want to make sure that you have a close relationship and that it's strategic. If you're a part of a whole, is it less strategic?
Big fan in terms of, you can go both ways of this, but sort of a diversification of your portfolio. So like you're talking a little bit about carving out niches of what you're doing. I think there is something to be said about being focused and understanding a certain segment. Like we're talking FinTech here, and you could divide it into 10 segments and you say, I want to go really deep in one. And I think that's smart. But we also believed a lot in, being open to opportunities and being diverse, right? Like you see what happens in the economy, and one area might take a hit, but another might be moving strong, right? So I'm talking out of two sides of my mouth here, because I also mentioned like we've gone deep into a couple areas within the venture side or real estate, but then we're also open to other opportunities that could be B2C, consumer focused, that kind of thing. So I don't know, big fan of diversification, but also of not spreading yourself too thin. I don't know. That was like a wishy-washy answer, to be honest with you.
Look, I think what I always find when I start when I start disagreeing with myself, I've probably arrived as far as I can go, right? And we all feel like then we're at the line, man. That's good.
What we do, like part of the things that we do with the Bass Association group is when we're talking to the banks, outline what it is you're looking for, right? So for us to enable us to kind of match these parties together, it's easy for us. It's easy to look at a fintech and see where he's going, what he's up to, what he needs, and what his money flow looks like, all that kind of stuff. You get to the Bass Bank and say, what do you want? What is it you're looking for? Mm-hmm. Man, you'd be surprised how many times that's a stump question. It's like, I don't know what we're looking for winners.
Yeah.
And, it's like, well, no, you're gonna have to
we want good companies. Yeah.
You want gaming? Do you want, this or what, so we can kind of do a little bit of a connecting. That vetting process that takes so much time.
It's becoming more and more interesting, right? That area
the bankers themselves have a hell of a time when you sit down and say, write it out. Give me 5 bullet points on paper.
I do too.
Yeah. But it's hard. It's hard. Honestly, Dave, like as we were getting this going, presenting this to our board, at the end of last year, and you try to put that, like, right when you put your strategy deck together, you got to put down like, who are we looking for? And if you say like, I don't know, like that doesn't exude a lot of confidence. But at the same time, until you go through it, right, and have some experience, then you can start to, and like you guys, you live in it, you can spot some of the winners. Like if you send a name over, you're like, okay, maybe I don't know this company or this market that well, but I understand what they're trying to do and the model, and like I can see it. But having something where you can put a few bullet points down to help paint the picture, at least out of the gate, I think is a nice way about it for banks. Yeah. But sometimes at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know, right? So they're going to lean on you guys probably a little bit as the experts to help do the matchmaking that you do.
Which should scare everyone, man. When I become the expert, we're in a lot of trouble.
What's cool though, is this is not the story that I think most people would think is the true story out there. Yeah. But when you sit down as a Bass Bank and you try to write, I'm looking for this industry, this thing, lending side, card side, I'm looking for this much of momentum or accounts, or however you want to count it, cards, whatever. And then the other thing that comes out is as soon as they get done kind of trying to outline that and scratch their head a little bit, pencil it up, we need more Bass Banks. And I'm like, exactly. Okay, so here's what really works out here, guys. You end up with, I'll call that Chris and folks like you guys at Grasshopper experts. And then you've got this next level down, which is pretty getting started here. I'm a Bass Bank. I don't really know exactly what I'm doing. I'm kind of looking to the experts for a little help and advice.
And that's working well right now.
So everybody agrees we need this level, the second level. And it's got to happen, and it needs to happen even faster. Although it's happening very fast, it needs to happen even faster because of the number of fintechs. So here's where it gets really interesting. These guys say, look, this is a excellent fintech that we've looked at. We've vetted this guy. I love him. He's just too small, or he's just too early in the game. Can we feeder him to somebody down here? And then when he reaches a point where it's a little too big for his balance sheet, I'll take him back. And so it's a little bit of a piggyback relationship that we're kind of seeing more and more starting to happen. And I think this is just a factor of the evolution of the industry. So we've got, I'm going to call you an old dog. Okay. So you're like,
Chris is an OG for sure.
For sure. Right. So he's an OG of this whole thing, man. And then you got the guys that are really good and really new. And then you've got some guys that are extremely new and very green. And all of these pieces actually work symbiotically with each other as these new fintechs come in.
It's interesting. And I mean, you're the data guys, so you would know this, but you think back to, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, how many BaaS banks were there, right? There was the originals, like I would point to like Green Dot and Bancorp and maybe Cross River on the lending side as the originals. And then we came along and then evolved and then Coastal got right? So you had like some 6-7 years ago. What are the numbers today? There's probably 50 BaaS banks.
81 BaaS banks, a little north of 400 fintechs that are consuming what I would call a chartered service or feature.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you need a bank charter to have.
Yeah. I mean, look,
Yes.
how do you
So
define
it'll be
it?
interesting to see where it goes. But like Dave, to sort of how you outlined it is like, of course, based on experience level, you probably have these 3 tranches. And, you know, I think it's harder to move deals around. I mean, be interesting to see what you guys see, but like the example you gave, a bank that said maybe too early and they go somewhere else and then they grow. Yeah, maybe they outsize the balance sheet or something, but it's hard to move those deals around once they get to that size, at least what we've seen. Right. And on the other side, what's been interesting now, getting back into it with Grasshopper over the last 6 months or so, is I think the fintechs have matured, and the ones that, you know, that really have some scale and growth opportunity, or they're large today, are also understanding like, maybe I can't be with only one bank, right? Like I need some redundancy, or the balance sheet won't simply handle it through one, and I need a bit of a consortium. And that's been interesting to us, I think, over the last couple of months as we've evaluated a couple opportunities. I think it's gonna continue.
Well, and for the newbies out there kind of watching this, trying to figure out what the hell's going on, keep in mind too that the fintech guy, you know, he'll come along with a model, right? And then he'll add a service, he'll add another service, so he may not be anything at first, but you know, a couple of years down the road, he may be big in lending. So everybody evolves and everybody needs that flexibility, and everybody is beginning to see that the bigger the ecosystem is and the better that we can communicate within that ecosystem, the better it is for everybody.
There is one clear evolution. I'll leave you guys with this. Somewhere around, and this is so ambiguous, but I'll say somewhere around a Series A is sort of we've got let's talk friends and family or pre-seed, right? Let's get a model together, and then let's get some seed money. Let's get a proof of concept. Let's get a few users on the thing, and it's real enough. At that point, let's be looking for Series A. Let's be looking for the big marketing budget, and let's go. And probably let's go back to the starting line and rebuild all the stuff we wish we'd had the right ability to do, right? Sometimes that BaaS relationship falls into that, and that's where we see a lot of shift. But I think Chris is right. Unless it's outgrown a balance sheet, larger fintech rarely shifts.
This is the competitive advantage each BaaS bank has amongst themselves. So you may be able to say, look, guys, I know right where you're at. You're at this moment where you need to make this move. Look what we can offer.
It's great.
That's the great analogy, Tanner, that you outlined. And we've even seen it too. And now I've been at 2 banks, right, that have done this. And I don't know, we probably did 30 or 40 program sponsorship at the last bank. And a lot of them were early stage, right? Like pre-revenue, sort of in that seed round. And as they've grown, and then you have conversations over time and they start to pick their head up. Back to that, you don't know what you don't know as a fintech entrepreneur early on either. They're getting smarter too on the banking side to say, I didn't know what to ask at the beginning because I didn't exactly know where this was going to go. But now here I am, and here's where my 3-year roadmap's going, and I need X, Y, Z, right? And they're getting smarter about what they're demanding of or asking for whether it's the technology player or the bank or some combination of the two.
Awesome.
And that's been fun to watch as well.
I love it, man. Final thoughts. I always tell everybody you can say anything you want. It didn't even have to be about banking. What's on your mind? I look at this like it's what do you wish somebody had asked you, right? What do you think? Any final thought you want, man? Shoot.
It just in general, like
Anything you want.
Crankbaits, spinnerbaits.
This is meant to just throw you, man. Whatever you want, whatever's on your mind.
oh man. Well, what would be my final thought here? I don't know. I think this would be like shameless plug. Keep an eye out for Grasshopper.
I love it.
We're, it's been a company that I think a great mission. Who we're working with, this sort of the small business and the venture community needs, that banking support and good digital tools now more than ever, given what's going on in the economy and everything going on. There's a company that's behind it. So I think like keep an eye out for us in the future. And I'm also excited about what's going on in FinTech in general, right? Like seeing more banks come along, like we talked about. I've been in it for 10 years. And it's now more exciting today, I think, than it's ever been. And I want to say thanks for having me on, guys. Always good to have you,
man. And look, I one point on Grasshopper, we're keeping an eye on Grasshopper, right? So I love that. And they got you, man. So I mean, hey, sky's the limit. Go get them.
We got a good team. You got a
bunch of people that have done this before, which always helps. Hey, I want to invite you to the roundup in Fredericksburg. You need to come. There's
The more than half of the Bass Banks will be there.
Yeah, half the Bass Banks will be there. The board of the Bass Association will be there. We're having the Bellamy Brothers. It'll be a big Texas barbecue.
In
About
November.
an hour west of
When is it? November?
November 2nd through the 4th. And every Bass Bank's invited.
All right. If I'm able to swing it, I'm there.
All right, man.
Yeah, you'll know a lot of folks there.
Yeah, you guys have cultivated a good group for sure.
We're having fun.
That's a good time.
Always a good time.
We like
Man.
to stay out in front of the wave.
Yeah. Hey, man, thanks so much. I mean, awesome conversation. Good to see your beautiful face.
Yeah.